So, we've all lived through a global pandemic, right? We get just how devastating it can be. But what if I told you that the very systems that power our global economy are also the same systems that help create and spread these diseases? It's a surprising idea, so let's dig into this really deep connection between business and pandemics. Just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, look at this number, $28 trillion. That's the estimated hit the global economy took from the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, that's a number so huge it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And it's exactly why we have to, get to the bottom of the root causes here. But here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers from Baruch College and Tecnológico de Monterrey are asking a critical question. What if this isn't just a recent thing, not just about one virus? What if this link between international business and communicable disease is actually a story that's been playing out for, get this, over 1,500 years? And this timeline just lays it all out, plain and simple. You've got the plague of Justinian spreading along trade routes way back in 541. Fast forward to the 1500s, and smallpox is following indigenous trade paths in the Americas. And then much more recently, SARS and COVID-19 hop on planes and zip around the globe. The pattern is crystal clear, isn't it? Wherever goods and people go, diseases are right there with them. Okay, so how does this whole thing actually work in our modern world? Well, these researchers broke it down into a really clear two-stage process. The first stage is, how does a local outbreak even start? And then, stage 2, how does that small, local problem explode into a global pandemic? There are 8 key factors they've identified, and we're going to walk through every single one. All right, let's kick things off with stage 1, how an epidemic emerges. We're talking about that jump from just a few infections in one spot to a much wider but still localized outbreak. So if we look at our framework again, we're zeroing in on this first step. What are the business factors that can kind of create the perfect storm for a new disease to grab hold in a country? Turns out there are 4 big ones. First step is the quality of a country's regulations. Think about it. When the rules for public health, nutrition, or the environment are weak or just not enforced, it's like leaving the door wide open for disease. A multinational company might operate in a way that cuts costs, but without meaning to, it could be raising health risks for everyone who lives there. Now, this is a really fascinating example of how all the pieces can connect. In one part of Mexico where water regulations were a bit loose, a company's operations made it easier to get a soft drink than a glass of clean water. Over time, that might contribute to higher rates of things like diabetes. And a population with more underlying health issues can have weaker immune systems, which makes them way more vulnerable when a new bug comes to town. Factor number 2 is urbanization. Big international companies, they're naturally drawn to big cities. You've got the workforce, you've got the infrastructure, but this also pulls a lot of people in from the countryside, leading to really fast urban growth, which can mean overcrowding. As cities sprawl outwards, they push into natural habitats, and that means more chances for people and animals to come into contact, which is a classic recipe for new viruses. Our third factor is something called resource-seeking foreign direct investment, or FDI. This is when companies invest in things like clearing forests for, say, palm oil plantations or for big mining projects. This kind of activity seriously disrupts ecosystems. It stresses out the local wildlife and cranks up the risk of what we call zoonotic diseases. That's when a virus makes the leap from an animal to a person. And the Nipah virus is a genuinely terrifying example of this. You had deforestation in Indonesia, partly funded by foreign investment, which wiped out the fruit trees that local fruit bats relied on. So what did the bats do? They flew over to Malaysia, where they ended up infecting pigs on huge commercial farms. And from the pigs, the virus jumped to the farmers. It's a direct line from an economic activity to a deadly new disease. And the last factor in this first stage is corporate political activity. Lobbying. This is when corporate influence chips away at a country's health and environmental rules. You can end up in a situation where short-term profit gets prioritized over the long-term public health measures that are designed to stop an outbreak before it even starts. So that's how a local problem can get started. But how does it go from local to global? That brings us to the second stage of this whole process. Let's see how things escalate. We're now shifting our focus to that next big leap, from a local epidemic to a worldwide pandemic that crosses every border. And this is where the incredible speed and scale of modern global business really enters the picture. And wow, this slide really hammers home just how much things have changed. Back in the day, diseases traveled at the speed of a camel on the Silk Road or a ship on the ocean. It took months, sometimes years to get around. But today, a virus can board a plane and be on a different continent in less than a day. The window we have to react has just shrunk to almost nothing. Factor 5 is kind of a double-edged sword: trade barriers. On the one hand, having really low barriers makes it easy for goods and people to move around, which, of course, can help a virus spread super fast. But on the other hand, when a pandemic hits, countries might suddenly slam those doors shut, putting up new barriers that block the export of critical medical supplies, which makes fighting the pandemic even harder for everyone. Number 6 is global migration. And we're not just talking about tourists here. The research points to groups like temporary farm workers, who are absolutely vital to our food supply. They often travel across borders for work and can live and work in pretty crowded conditions, which can create a powerful pathway for a disease to travel from one country to the next. Factor 7 is our incredibly complex global supply chains. Just think about it. Massive, concentrated industrial farms that supply multinational food companies, well, they can become dangerous breeding grounds for new viruses. And because these supply chains are so huge and tangled, it's almost impossible to keep an eye on them for health risks. The 2009 H1N1 pandemic is such a stark example of this. It probably started on massive industrial pig farms in Mexico, which were part of a global supply chain. These kinds of concentrated operations are perfect for letting viruses mutate. And that's what happened. The virus spread from workers to the community, and from there, it just exploded across the world, killing hundreds of thousands of people. And finally, we have the most obvious factor of them all: international travel. Every business trip, every vacation, every single flight is a potential free ride for a pathogen. It's how a virus can cross an ocean before the person carrying it even feels a single symptom. Okay, so that's the problem laid out. It's a pretty heavy picture, seeing how the engine of our global economy can also be an engine for disease. But the research doesn't just leave us there. It also asks a really important question. Can business be part of the solution? To really get the solution, we need to understand this key idea: the commercial determinants of health. It's basically the concept that everything companies do, from the products they sell to the way they operate to the environments they help create, all of it has a huge impact on our health, for good or for bad. So, what can companies actually do? The research lays out 3 clear steps. First, they can start proactively checking their own operations for any potential health risks. Second, they can use those amazing global supply chains not to spread disease, but to get vaccines and medical supplies to where they're needed most. And third, they can team up with governments and NGOs to form really powerful partnerships. And look, this isn't about charity. At the end of the day, it's just smart business. Like this quote says, healthier communities mean healthier business. It's pretty simple, right? A healthy population means you have healthy workers and healthy customers. Protecting public health is actually about protecting the very foundation of the economy. And that leaves us with this one last, pretty provocative question to think about. We've seen how business decisions can accidentally open the door to a pandemic. But what if companies really start to own their role in public health? Could the next big decisions, the ones that stop the next $28 trillion disaster, be made not in a science lab, but in a corporate boardroom?